Hey, Joe.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Not at all.
I've got my notes here.
Okay.
The first time we got in touch, or I got in touch with you, was I was looking through the Google, and I put in Jung and yoga, and because I went to this Carl Jung talk in the Space Between.
Oh yeah.
Which is a new studio here in Dublin.
Yeah, lovely studio.
And what I found quite interesting in this talk was about integrating your shadow, and how, like, essentially we have a dark side, some of us, an animalistic side that sometimes we don't like to acknowledge, and we don't know how to express it. And it made me think about how in yoga, if you notice on social media, it's all sweetness and light, isn't it?
No.
But, people, it's much safer to talk about, like, live every day like it's your last, and drink your green smoothies and that type of thing, because people, I think, are kind of afraid to explore the darker side of their soul, as it were. And I was quite interested to see how could Jung's philosophies tie into yoga, and that's how I came across your website, because not many people talk about Carl Jung, and I know that as in terms of philosophy, when I'm speaking in class, I try to get people to not necessarily, I'm not trying to, like, teach them the history of yoga, but I'm trying to encourage them to question their own thoughts. Is it something that, what's interested you in Jung?
Yeah. Well, first, I should say that I'm definitely not, a scholar of Carl Jung, but I have an interest, like you. And I suppose he was someone who studied and spoke a lot about the unconscious, and bringing the unconscious into the conscious, so bringing the darkness into the light. And so for me, that's always been the sort of the real juice of the spiritual practice. It's probably more tasty and quick to think of the new, the lighter side, the Instagram side, like you say, and yet there's so much richness that we get when we do start to delve into the parts of us that are not so pretty. So that is my interest, and I've just read a lot of his stuff, and I'm interested in his terms, and then how you can weave Jungian philosophy, or philosophy itself, just into these more modern arts, or ancient spiritual art practices, and how it all essentially all keeps coming back to the same place, or the lessons keep kind of, they pop up in so many different places.
There's tons of overlap, because India has a rich history, and I mean, the yoga that we're teaching here in Europe is heavily influenced by India, obviously, but that doesn't mean it has to be exclusive, like Hinduism that you're sharing, or even Buddhism. It can be Stoicism. You can be sharing different types of philosophies, but I think, as you mentioned, it comes back to the conscious, the unconscious, and what the internal narrative that we have. Because I realised that one of the great things for me about practicing yoga is I'm more emotionally resilient. I am, like, recently my apartment flooded, essentially. Well, it flooded. You can probably tell by the floorboards downstairs. and things are over the last few weeks have been quite difficult for me. I've had a lot of stuff going on. But what I realised is that sometimes you can't control those factors, but you can control how you react to it. And it's when I have people come into class, and sometimes if you use, like, Sanskrit words, or you're referring to people that they've never heard of, it can kind of alienate people. But you can really simplify it and say, look, we all have thoughts in our head. Some of them we're not necessarily proud of. We've done behaviours sometimes that we're not proud of, but we have the ability to change if we can observe our thoughts. And how would you, for example, thread Jung into your class, or how have you done that?
Sure,
I'm looking to steal ideas, basically.
Oh God,
to be
no
inspired.
pressure now. But I suppose I think you've just said it there. I think for me, I suppose my whole spiritual journey is how can I relate to this, and how can I then, as a teacher, make it relatable. So I'm sure you consider an academic young. A philosophical debate or lecture, and it can go right over your head, in the same way as you could sit in a class where a teacher's spouting only Sanskrit, and you could completely feel that this is a practice that's not for you. So we have this wonderful opportunity with yoga where it's an embodied practice. So we all have a body, so there's a good starting point. and then we all have a mind, and really then I think again, I really am not a scholar of Carl Jung, but I think what his gift is that he did really offer to humanity that we are all the same. That we have this quite structured way of living in our conscious or unconscious or subconscious, and that just like yoga is a science and a technique, and it can unfurl on the mat, we can sort of unfurl our minds in front of us if we're open to that, if we're willing, and I suppose that's what the yogis spoke of, like turning towards the ego and looking at the ego, not either letting it run the show or run away from it. And yeah.
How do you then relate that to, because it seems like you're specialising, or one of the areas you're interested in is women's health and women's well-being, and you're
a woman.
Yeah. And but yeah, okay.
I'm pregnant. Yes,
okay,
I know
right.
you were.
A
pregnant woman.
As a pregnant woman, yeah, exactly. So that is an area that interests you. So how do you communicate to women, and when you're having these workshops, what have you found to be maybe that potentially women are lacking, or where there's a need?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it is all part of that same thread of like the moment that we can make the side of ourselves that we don't put out in the world so easily, something that we turn towards, and we have that, what the Buddha called the metta, the kindness for our own suffering, our own ego, whatever you might call it on a particular day. We kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Yeah. And that's what I love about the yoga room. It kind of like you go in and you might have your mala beads and think that everyone's better at chaturanga than you, and suddenly after a little while you're in a room full of people who are pretty much the same as you, who all have their own struggles, and we start to find what's relatable. So that's why I love working with women, because I am a woman, and that's a good starting point, and probably just completely through my own journey, just finding that the kind, compassionate voice is the one that I need most. And that's what I need from a teacher, not necessarily all the time, and not mollycoddling, and, definitely not turning the blinkers on, but certainly being in a room full of people where I can be vulnerable. And I think that's what the practice offers us if we're open to it. Can you actually... Are you willing to be vulnerable and therefore discover a lot about yourself? So, yeah. So for me as a facilitator of women's work, I think vulnerability is a big word, and I think it's key to the human experience. But I certainly think it's a journey for women to allow ourselves to be really vulnerable amongst other women. There's. We could go into, the 2,000 years of patriarchy that's, made our sisters slightly separate from each other and made us compete, and all of that. So I could talk about this for hours.
But that is, more and more people live alone now. When they bring up their children, they don't necessarily have. We were just talking about this, how you've come back to Dublin from living in London, and you're pregnant and you want to raise your child in Dublin. And that connection between the three generations is something that is lost in Ireland now, with so many people going over to Australia or England like it was back in the 70s, like my parents did. And that's a real shame, because what's more important than your family? If you get on with your family, that is.
And some families.
But now we're finding that we live alone a lot more, and we don't have the support network. And if you're someone has to bring up a child, and say your partner is going to work or you're going to work, it can be a really lonely experience, I imagine. And therefore, there's a lot more options, I think, for men to like join teams, football teams. There is for women as well, but it's just not as obvious, I think, in our society. And therefore, I see a huge growth in these women's circles and women's meetups. And I think it's needed because, as you said, the patriarchy. Well, when you say the patriarchy, do you mean like, as in? What do you mean?
Oh God!
I know what the word means, but how has that affected women? Do you think, in a negative way?
Sure. Well, I suppose the thing to say is that when I use the word patriarchy, I'm using it really broadly, and I'm definitely not using it to say that it's men, and that it's what's been done onto women, which is very often how minimal of the debate can be made.
Yeah, true.
Or black and white. Well, I suppose we have been living in a systemized kind of approach to life that now people are recognizing doesn't work and want to change, or certainly that's what I observe. And some of the way that we've kind of created our world, we want to change. And for some reason, it seems to be the time for women to kind of use their voice and be heard in what it might take to change that, I think, this is the first generation where we have the opportunity to really use that voice. You've kind of broken away from the stereotypical norms of what it is to be a woman, or back to the 50s, the housewife, or, even it's interesting when you say like men have football groups, and a lot of what women might have done coming together was around the children, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. A lot of women don't have children, or men are raising children without mothers, and so there's that whole thing around the children has also expanded and become a lot more broad. So
yeah, I hear that, and that makes sense. We forget sometimes that 2 generations ago, essentially, it was arranged marriages. Even in Ireland, by my great grandparents, pretty much, you go to the fair and they say, "Do you fancy this one?" and you put them together. That's kind of how it went back in the day.
And you stay.
And you stay together. And then, in the 50s, women were kind of confined to the house, and I suppose it's really like you have the revolution of the 60s and 70s in England, that kind of happened a bit in Ireland, I imagine. But things have changed a lot. And I don't think much has changed for men, but did it need to change really? I don't feel. I feel perfectly fine as a man in society. I don't feel like repressed or anything. So, but I do think that if you have kids, because I would like to, one day be a father, you have potentially to feel very lonely, but also I've heard that when you have kids, you actually meet new people, because you actually you socialise with the people who have kids as well, and it opens up in new circles. But when you do, have you done that workshop yet in Reformation?
Pregnancy.
Have you?
Last week.
It was last week. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so, there's another one coming up. But
okay, in Reformation.
In Reformation.
Okay. And in those workshops, what do you? I assume it's all women.
Or what do we do? It is all women.
You can't.
So far,
a fella can't come with his missus.
At the moment, no. That particular workshop is just a women's yoga. It's yoga modified for pregnancy and breath techniques and visualization meditation. So it's just a yoga workshop. Most of the offerings for pregnant women in terms of bringing a child into the world do include the partner, if there is a partner, of course. Yeah. Active birthing and hypnobirthing, but this particular workshop is just a yoga workshop.
What's hypnobirthing?
Yeah, good question.
Like hypnotherapy?
Well, I'm learning it at the weekend, so I'll tell you more.
Okay.
But, I don't know. Okay. It's hypnotherapy for your labour process, for your pregnancy, but also but mainly the actual process of labour.
Right.
Yeah. So
okay.
Self-hypnosis. Yeah.
And when women are doing yoga and they're pregnant, what can't they do? Because I've heard different things at different stages. Yeah. What's like a no-no?
You have to come to a class. There are contraindications throughout each trimester. But like, in a nutshell, you don't want to be lying on your belly after 12 weeks, mainly because you will feel that you don't want to do that. You don't necessarily want to be twisting or compressing the belly. To be honest, this is my first time being pregnant, and I've taught pregnancy yoga for a long time. It becomes very obvious what you do want to do and what feels unnatural. So anything that compresses, tightens the belly, you don't really want to be doing too much of that. You don't want to overheat.
What about down? I've heard that if you do downward facing dog, it can breach the baby, or the baby can breach. Is that?
No, I don't want to debate your resources, but I would actually argue that it could actually do the opposite. If you were in a healthy downward facing dog and you weren't holding it too long and your body felt okay in that pose, if your baby was breech, it could actually have a lot more room to move into optimum position, I would say. But again, it's all of it is open to debate, like all of yoga. People will have their preferences, and at the end of the day, it is a self-practice, so you will keep coming back again and again to actually what feels good. And most of the lovely literature I'm reading about pregnancy at the moment is really about that philosophy. If it feels good, it probably is good, is, the kind of philosophy the good midwives seem to adhere to.
And I think, in general, if you're encouraging people to do yoga and they're more in touch with their senses and how they feel in their body, then that's beneficial for anyone, but particularly for pregnant women, because also if you've done yoga a lot before, say you've done maybe handstands before, and you're pregnant, I think it's a good idea. I'm assuming here that you try to keep a similar lifestyle that you've always had, even when you're pregnant. So you don't like stop completely whatever you're doing, but at the same time, if you've never done any physical activity, doing a strenuous yoga class when you're pregnant might not be a good idea. Because I've seen a picture of a CrossFit lady, and it's a really famous picture. She's heavily pregnant. Wow. She's lifting like a big, she's deadlifting a lot of weight. Wow. And it was on the front cover of some sports magazine, and people were up in arms about it. But some people were saying, look, she's always done this. She's an athlete. Yeah. This is what her body's used to. Yeah. So would that be a fair thing to consider? Yeah,
well, I think, it's like it's a great opportunity to really practice yoga in every sense, in terms of you don't know until you yourself uniquely are pregnant, and what that particular pregnancy is bringing to your physical body, emotional body, every part of your body in that, that particular pregnancy. A woman could have 4 pregnancies and they could all be wildly different. She might be able to lift deadlifts on one and be on the couch for 9 months on the other. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to actually really practice your yoga, which is you can't possibly know from moment to moment what your experience is. So can you be that open? You know, can you actually dissolve your ideas and belief systems to such a point that you are open moment to moment? And that is the journey of pregnancy, because you are changing in every moment. Like literally your body is different every day. And you genuinely don't know what's coming next. So I think the less fixed you can be on what my practice was before, or, you know, this has always been, the better. And, you know, and having said that, then I think a lot of the, you'll read in a lot of just, one of the things about being pregnant is you can't actually get your words out of your mouth or formulate them in your brain. But I think a lot of sports does advocate doing what you've done before. You know, you read it a lot in Jim Blurb. And so if that works for you, I think it's great. Like for me, I've always been quite active. In this pregnancy, I'm very active, but I want to do things like dance and swim. I did body pump the other day, and just every part of me was like, I want to get out. And the weights were getting lighter and lighter until I was just kind of picking one up with my little finger by the end. But that, you know, that's just my own just feeling on it, my own, you know, how I feel.
You know, we Max Strom says that it's amazing how one of the few times in life we teach someone to breathe is when they're pregnant. Yeah. You know, and where you're performing one of the most physically difficult acts a human can do is to give birth, and which just goes to show you the power of the breath. Yeah. When you're breathing in, like when you're pregnant, is it? I've seen it on TV. You know, there's kind of like almost like a Kapalabhati type breathing, like sharp exhales.
Sharp breath.
Is that the optimal way to?
I don't know. I think there used to be some science around breathing out the mouth and in the nose. Used to be kind of called birthing breath. Yeah. But nowadays, I think it's more. There's more of an openness around it, which is just if you're breathing and you're conscious of your breath, you're still alive, and you're bringing awareness to the activity that's going on, which is the main thing. So I think nowadays they encourage women to breathe in a way that is supportive to them. But you can, there are all sorts of sort of nice pranayama practices you can bring into the labour process and into your pregnancy. And like you say, you know, I'm also a student of Max, and I remember him saying that, and I think I remember picking up on how interesting is it that we will do these practices so easily for the thought of somebody else, that you're, you know, like, I'm pregnant, this is for my baby. And yet getting ourselves to do those pranayama practices every day and committing to that discipline is harder when we're trying to commit to something for the good of our own health, you know.
It's hard though to sit in a room and just breathe, and that's coming from a yoga teacher. What I found, and Jonah Kest said this brilliantly once. Jonah Kest is the nephew of Brian Kest, who's like the power yoga god, I suppose you call him. And he said that once, this is a breathing class, the movement is secondary. And I know it sounds so simple, but you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is a breathing class. And it's almost like the movement is your cue to breathe, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. Which is, no matter how many times you can say that a lot to people, but they have to come to that realization themselves, and it just takes practice, doesn't it? Like moving and breathing together. But even me, I find it hard to sit in a room and just do my breathing. But I think we need physical exertion, because we don't get it anymore. Yeah. You know, in modern life, we're sitting down all the time. And also as well, I find that in a class, when you're moving and you're breathing, you become more emotionally available, more emotionally open. And this is, I've learnt some like brilliant kind of what's the word? I've enriched my knowledge of philosophy mostly in yoga classes. When the teacher said something, I've gone, oh, I'm going to look that up or learn more about that. Yeah. Whereas someone was to say that to me in the middle of the day, I'd be like, yeah, what if I'm busy thinking too much and not feeling enough? And this is, I wanted to actually ask you about Celtic spirituality.
Again, I'm like, I need to check my website, my copyright.
But
Yes.
that is, I mean, something I used to love it. My old man would tell me stories about like Celtic tales and this type of thing. And I think that when you're in a class, it's great when like I love it at the end when the teacher tells you a story,
Yeah.
or reads you a poem or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't. I'd like to do that more. Do you weave any kind of poetry or anything like that into your
Yeah,
classes?
very much so. That's obviously what you picked up on. I must have said something on my website that alluded to that, because that's my joy. I was an actor for years, and I do love the art of storytelling, and I do think it's, to me, the poetry and the words, they're more of the same with the yoga. The yoga is the poetry of the body, and the words are the poetry of the mind and language and the language that pulls us all together. And these ancient languages that we don't even understand, but for some reason they pull us together. Sanskrit chanting, and so there's so much richness in. I'm a lover of words, so just bringing them into the the body, and for me was really important as well, because it didn't really come from. I wasn't very sporty. I wasn't a very physical person, and suddenly I'm here teaching yoga, and I really needed that root in the more in the words and the creative and the language and just the dance. I can even feel it, the dance of words in my mouth. So yes, I do. And interesting, I remember it was Max Strom who said, try reading the same poem to someone at the start of a class, and then when they're in Shavasana at the end, when they've been a journey, and you're going to have a whole, people will be agitated at the start, and at the end they're going to be saying, where did that poem come from? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because we're open, and this is why these practices were always offered. Come to the body, settle the body, settle the mind, and then you're open to receive. So in other words, then meditate, then dharana, dhyana, prepare the body. And, that's what the physical practices were, a preparation for the body, so that we would be more open to this sort of universal language, I guess. And for me, I find the universal language in poetry, or a beautiful story or a myth, storytelling it's innate. I love this idea that myths aren't created; they're in us. They're in our, the mythological tapestry of our system. The other, one of the bodies, if you will, that isn't the physical body, is that resonance for these stories that bring us back to the bigger picture. We're always looking for. How can we anchor ourselves in something deeper than just this, than just this thought, just this physical manifestation?
And I think stories actually, we take in information a lot easier through stories.
Yeah.
Because I think that ties back to being a child, when your mum and dad will read you a story going to bed. That when you're teaching a class and someone reads you a poem or a story, it's very nurturing. It's very... And as Max and you said, like towards the end of a class, people are way more open to that. Like I've noticed, I've tried to go too deep at the start of a class, like as in what I'm talking about, and I can see people feeling a bit agitated. They're moving their hands and moving their feet, and I think, okay, I need to save this to the end.
Yeah. Yeah, but also, like people are truth tellers. We're like. We crave the truth, even if we're living some sort of bullshit life. You know what I mean? Which we all are to a certain point. We all crave the truth. So in a yoga class where somebody tells you a story that points to a truth, something that is has greater meaning to it, then people will believe that. It'll go into their system. And I think at the start of a class, we're all up here. That if you're not grounded yet and you're using the practice to come in and ground, it's all going to be up here. And then a story on top of that, you're not going to meet the truth. You're just going to meet a lot of words and a lot of bombardment and stimuli that we already have too much of. So it's that, it's I suppose, knowing as a teacher when to offer that and when it's ready to be received.
Sometimes I think, how much do I personalize this? As in, if I have a message or a philosophy that I'm trying to get across, do I reference myself in it, or do I reference us as people? And I sometimes think about, like, I think when someone starts speaking, if they make it personal, it's more interesting, generally speaking. But then you don't want, like, I've been talking lately about resilience and how, like, when shit goes pear-shaped in your life, you need to just kind of get your head up and keep going, as it were, essentially, and nothing can go your way all the time. And essentially, you shouldn't be moaning, and to be able to endure suffering, as it were. And when I'm in a class, I think, do I talk about myself? Because if I do, it makes it quite selfish, and also it sounds like I'm moaning. Or do I? Or sometimes it's wiser to use the word we. Because I've stopped using the word you, so I won't say, you might find that sometimes you feel down or whatever, for example, and instead say, we sometimes feel like we can feel down, and therefore you're making it more communal. Is that something that you've thought about, or
sure, yeah? And I, again, like everything, it's probably been a journey. I've probably spouted on about myself for far too long, and then I've probably turned it into all sorts of we and the community, and and after 15 years of teaching, I've probably brought it back to what's the most simple thing here, you know. And I mean, you know, it's just what you learn in yourself, isn't it? And then what you're bringing in your class is just the most truthful version of that. So I would tend to try and speak of myself in the first person, or speak of my experience in the first person, because, like you say, I think it's more relatable, and I think it helps you to avoid assumptions, because we don't actually know. We can assume that we all experience this, but we don't actually know that as our innate experience. So speaking in the first person, I think, is generally a good rule. I think definitely not speaking in the you do this and I definitely don't. That's probably not a recommendation. All you people down there who still do this. But I would also, I think as a new teacher, I would have felt the pressure or the desire as well to really philosophize and give a lot. You know, I think you come to this profession as usually as with some level of empathy and with wanting to help. You know, it's all from good intentions, and you recognize that this practice has helped you so much, and now you want to help other people. But it's also being careful that you're not projecting any of your own need to help on your students, and actually that the practice is a whole science in itself, and if we can allow ourselves to be brave enough to offer that. And then, of course, there are moments where philosophy, and I'm going to sound like the wanker I'm trying not to be right now, but sometimes the philosophy does just come through you, you know, and I don't know if you feel it as a teacher, but I certainly feel it when the philosophy just drops in and you offer it through, and it's a very even exchange. There's no sort of, I want something from you, so I'm going to say this because I want an audience, and I know the moments where I'll say something and I'll be like, I was still a little bit of a wanker there, you know. There was just a little...
Sound a bit arsey.
Yeah, a little need in me that needed something that didn't need to come out right there. So, you know, it's just watching that, and that's the gift of being in spiritual practice as a teacher, is we're the beginner, you know, we're constantly learning what's truth.
But I do think it's important to, every time we teach a class, analyse what did I do there that I liked, I didn't like, how could I change that?
Yeah.
To constantly do that, because people often only give you feedback when it's good, or they'll give you. I mean, I don't get any bad feedback. Well, I'm sure there is, or maybe there is, but I don't get any. But so therefore, I'm actually going to this thing next week with Jerry Duffy, who's like a public speaking expert, and it's a 1-day immersion course. Like, it's the whole day, and we got to prepare a presentation, and they'll tell us how we fared public speaking.
Cool.
And I'm looking forward to being in an environment where people say, then give me a list of things that I need to work on. I don't know, it could be like eye contact, could be body language, could be the words I use, the volume of my voice, anything. Because I've spent so long now assessing people, training people to teach yoga and teaching yoga myself, that no one tells me, like, basically trains me, essentially. I mean, I've done the odd CP D course. Yeah, CPD course. I've done the odd one here and there, but you don't get that one-to-one where the people break you down.
And I think you're making a really important point, and it's one that it is a continuous debate in the yoga world. But we're calling ourselves essentially therapists, and we're under no direct supervision. And every other therapist you will ever sit in a room with is absolutely regulated and under supervision, and is bringing back what they're taking in every week or month or whatever it is to their supervisor, to their therapist, and they're in continuous learning and they're in continuous support. And I think that's a huge, huge topic around the yoga world. And that's where you get into murky territory when you are philosophizing or you are sort of offering people help that is outside the structure of asana, pranayama, meditation, because you're opening yourself up to something wider that isn't particularly regulated, actually.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, I think that that is... I mean, it's very easy to do a 200-hour course now or to host one. I think
in a day, isn't it? Now you can do it.
Pretty much. And I've heard that Yoga Alliance are now changing a lot. It was on the Yoga Land podcast. They had the lady on from Yoga Alliance, I forget her name, but she was saying how they're changing the regulations now to make it a bit stricter for people to come on. But yeah, I'm interested in my own development because I've realised the power of being or trying to be a good communicator, how much that can change your life, every part of your life. And I'm fascinated by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Jordan Peterson. These people are like phenomenal speakers, or Brené Brown. Brené Brown. Like these people, I think what separates them from everyone else? They're not saying anything that's new? Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson is probably, but he learned off someone else's his astrophysics. So they're not saying things that are necessarily new, but they're saying them in a way that's captivating people. And I feel like I am sometimes trapped by my ability to communicate. And how when I met Jerry, for example, Jerry is you can tell that he's really kind of worked on himself to make him now like an exceptional communicator, and it's just fascinating to see that. And I really truly believe what I plan to do next year. I haven't said this before, but I am planning to like host public speaking courses for yoga teachers.
Great.
And how do we learn to be better communicators? Not just speaking, but non-verbal communication. And I find this whole area fascinating because it really goes back to how we feel about ourselves, doesn't it? How we developed as children, how our parents interacted with us, and that carries through in our life. But I assume you've never struggled with public speaking because you're
ever
an actress.
Communicating ever. I've got that one down. Well, no, I've definitely struggled. So that's but I am an actor or a trained actor, and I have worked with my voice for many years, which was definitely a plus to when I started teaching yoga. It was helpful. I knew how to stand up in front of a room and present myself. But then there was obviously the struggles of I'm not performing when I'm in a yoga space. So then, how do I integrate what I've learned
and interact as well?
And and I certainly went through that first steep learning curve of I'm not here. It's not me at the top of the room presenting a show to the audience, which I think is an easy trap to fall into when you're a new teacher because, it creates a sort of a protective layer between you and those people over there, and that's all part of the journey, but it certainly didn't bring me much satisfaction. And I wanted to be in the room sharing in a way that was completely authentic. And having said that, I think that is the skill of communication for being a human, so it doesn't make any difference that I'm an actor or a yoga teacher, or it's, like you say, how can we just learn better communication skills because we want to be better human beings. And
But you must have learned being an actor how to project your voice, and that, and I think all of that stuff is really important to be your base.
Yeah.
But I heard something brilliant the other day, and it was when you're doing a speech, because essentially when you're teaching a class, it's a series of speeches that you're making. A speech is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. You know, you're asking questions to the people and you're gauging their reaction. And although I've referenced teaching a class to being like a performance before, because the classroom is like the stage, the caveat there is that if you seem like you're just walking around prancing about the place, giving instructions and just belting it out, you're not showing any empathy for the people that are around you. You're not checking in with them to see how is this going down with everyone else. And that's a whole lot of that.
Which I hope is the point. But yeah, very often not. Yeah, and you're in a conversation, like you say, you're in a non-verbal conversation. You might be speaking, but their bodies are certainly speaking. And if you listen to, I even listened to the awful Bikram documentary, which I'm sure you'll bring up in many podcasts, but I did listen to that the other night, and somebody mentioned that Bikram's gift was that he could literally get in the body of his student and know exactly, but know exactly what was going on, feel it in his own body. And I've heard that reference to Iyengar before, and I understand that, you know, as a good teacher, we are in a conversation with our students' bodies. And if you are so busy, you know, spouting off what I'm going to say next, then it's very hard to be embodied yourself as a teacher. And I think you do need that level of awareness that brings you inside each student's experience to a certain point. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you are really teaching a practice that works, that is helping another human to feel. You know, to feel on a deeper level so that they can have a deeper experience. And if your experience is if your teaching is taking away from that, then you have to question why. Because that's what your students have come from, and that's what you have a duty to offer.
I think that's where charisma is great and very important, but narcissism is
great.
No, exactly, not so great. But and that is something that we. That's why I'm really conscious of teaching too many classes. That it would at one stage I was teaching 20 classes a week, and it was becoming like robotic almost.
Sure,
and I thought I need to do less and make them more impactful. Now I'm not saying I'm sure there's some people out there that can teach 20 classes and make everyone them very, very fresh, but I found I didn't have the emotional capacity to do that. So now I'm doing I think I do 9 a week maybe, and other things obviously. What's your schedule like?
Well, when you said the 20, I nearly cringed, because there was once upon a time that I think I had 19 classes in London in 1 week.
Oh wow!
And totally burnt out, totally and utterly. And so my schedule it's probably not even worth going around the houses with at the moment, because I've just moved back from London in June and found out very quickly that I was pregnant, and I'm now rescheduling my life around living in another country and having a baby in 2.5 months. So my schedule is a little bit all over, but I do. I mean, I work but I work to a comfortable level, and I've had to really learn that. I was as an actor, I was someone who came from the point of view that when you have work, you take it. Yes is the first word on your vocabulary. You say yes to every job going, and when you're not working as an actor, you're jobbing as something else. So that was the yoga, and then I've had to learn the hard way, probably how that affects everything actually. And only very recently have I kind of tapped into this idea that when we are working that much, we have to look at why. And you hear about workaholism, but you don't really associate that with yoga, do you? It's like they don't go hand in hand. But if you're receiving so much from your teaching practice and your students, and there's a lot of sort of interplay there, there's a lot of intimacy actually in that room, you will sort of fill yourself up. And then you have to address the other areas in your life, your own intimate relationship, your play, your fun, your rest, you're putting your bath in your recording studio and doing up your house. You need to leave, that's the yoga. Again, it's back to, where have you overexerted, and is it healthy? Are you in balance? And I think it's very easy. I don't know why so easy with this teaching practice of yoga, but to overwork actually, and over offer and over give, and then we're into the whole realm of codependency and over empathic personalities and all of that, so just looking, constantly looking at where can I readdress the balance and create a healthy work life, everything, ensemble for myself.
I mean, as you said, given the changes in your life now, you've had to you'll be able to serve people that need it. I mean, that I think because I know you in your website talks about retreats and stuff like this, but I assume now retreats are kind of out the window for a while.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my overworking probably would have been retreats. The last few years I was really committed to teaching quite a lot of retreats. I work for retreat companies and it was great, and I got it, at the time I was single and I was traveling all over the world and I was teaching and had very little responsibility, so I was able to give so much to my work, so I did nearly 5 years like that, and now that's a very big shift, now I'm back in Dublin, and I just taught my last retreat in Morocco last week.
Nice.
Not last for life, but last for this side of life anyway. And so no, I will park that. But I suppose being pregnant now has opened up a new aspect of my own life. So it's made me look at why aren't there retreats for mums with young babies, and surely that's the time women want to go away, and do they take the babies with them, or do we organise it, so it's kind of opened up a whole new avenue of exploration.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's definitely needed. And before I let you go, I have a question.
Yeah.
1 second, let me check the old gram, because someone sent it on Instagram.
Oh right, okay, that happened.
That happened, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, 1 second.
One question.
What? Yeah.
I'll just pick one out of the long list.
Well, your Instagram. Now I've only known you for 45 minutes, but your Instagram, you need to get on it.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
I'm a bit passive in that area.
You're passive, yeah.
Yeah.
So if I go to my stories now, none of this is edited, by the way, so people are just watching me searching my phone, which is. Okay, so if I go to my story... No, Instagram, I can talk a little about Instagram while I'm doing that. I'm currently kind of telling my girlfriend about how to use Instagram. And there are some things about Instagram that aren't great, but the one thing that is great about it is whenever something's happening, I check Instagram. As in, like, if someone's doing a workshop or a retreat, I check their Instagram. I'm not going to check their website because I don't know when it was updated.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know if they have a website designer, but I know their Instagram is their own personal thing.
Uh-huh.
The dog has started barking. So, let's have a look. There's two questions.
Oh.
Will you get back into acting?
Ooh. Well, I never quite planned to get out of acting. It just left me more than anything. I trained as a yoga teacher whilst I was doing probably the biggest show that I'd done for Showtime in Canada. And I took a break and I trained as a yoga teacher, and the yoga took over. Like, literally, that was the energy of it. I never tried to quit acting. It just happened. I still do a lot of voice acting. So I just sit in a studio like this often. So in that sense, I feel like, yeah. But I also wonder if maybe it's something that will come back to me. Yeah. So I would love if it came back. So if there's any big directors listening to this podcast, hey. I'm available.
Okay. Oh, this is a deep one.
Will you marry me?
By the way, that question, would you get back into acting, was by Natty Comics. Cool. Yeah, there you go. I can't pronounce this person's name, so I'm not going to. But thank you for the question. Happy Botello. Nailed it.
Right.
That's the
Okay.
name,
Oh,
I'm
that's
sure.
the name.
It's not a question. How can we get more in tune with nature, a part of the outside world we seem to have lost sensitivity to?
Beautiful. Lovely question.
Mm.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, yeah, I think how can we get more in touch with nature, the part of ourselves we've lost sensitivity to? I mean, I feel like it's answered there. The nature is it's around, isn't it? It's around us. It's begging us, exactly.
Trees.
It's begging us to come and be in the language of nature. I always bring it back to language, actually. And I know the side of myself when I get a little hard and brittle in myself. I'll notice that I kind of, I get out of the natural world very easily. And then, so something like going for a walk in a forest is like an anchor back to that. It's a therapy, isn't it? So how do we do that? I suppose on a really practical level, get yourself out in nature every day, make it a practice. Surround yourself with things that bring you back to the elements, candles in your living room and plants in your bathroom, and strip it back to what is already readily available in our big mother Gaia, our mother Earth, because our world is designed to move us away from that so easily. Yeah.
And I'd like to add to that, if I may, on my own podcast, become a dog parent. Dog owner, because I have a dog now, and 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm outside walking him around, waiting for him to go to the toilet, and I'm outside. And normally in the morning times, I wake up and I look at my phone, but now I wake up and I have to get him outside as quickly as possible because don't want him to go toilet inside. And I get outside, put him outside. I've got my dressing gown on and I've got my rain jacket over it and like some sandals on. I'm walking around and I'm looking up at the sky and it's dark. And I think, I never look at the sky anymore.
Wow.
Like, and especially at night time, I'm never looking up. And then in the morning, I run him. This morning we did about 1K in the park, just around the park, beautiful. Put the wets on. So if you have an animal in your house, I think that really brings you back to nature because the animals are so simple, and you got to take them for a walk. Often now we don't need to walk anywhere. We're just like, I'll just take the car or take a bus or.
We've become disconnected in every sense, right? Yeah.
It's so hard to kind of think, I'm just going to get up now and go for half an hour walk, because sometimes you think, I could be doing my admin or whatever instead. Yeah. So
and just because you did pick up on it there about the night sky still being dark when you go out. In the yoga practice, they do speak about the Amrit Vela, and I think in the Celtic spirituality we call it the gloaming, which are these beautiful offerings of the same thing, and it's the moment before dawn breaks. And in fact, the moment before dusk as well, when the veils are supposed to be thinner and we can really access those worlds much easier. So we're not quite living in our sort of brittle, hard, intelligent minds, and we're a little bit more accessible, a bit more open. So if you can get yourself up at 5 with your dog or with your spiritual practice, I'll still be in bed, but...
It's kind of forced upon me, but I've adapted really, and it's there's something really lovely about animals where they're so simple. They just need a bit of love, a bit of attention, and if I leave the house for 4 hours and I come back, he's mad to see me. If I leave the house for a minute and come back, he's still it's like as if I've been away for 4 hours. So he's great. To wrap it up, if people want to find you and do your next workshop, as you pointed out, you will find my Instagram and you'll find me on it sometimes. So Joanne King Star, and you can check out my website for any workshops, joannekingyoga.com.
Right,
okay. When's it? Have you got the next one scheduled?
There's a pregnancy yoga workshop scheduled for sometime in January. I can't quite remember it's sometime near the end of January.
Okay.
And a couple of kind of ongoing regular classes at Yoga Dublin and Oriel and Sandymount, and
Where in Sandymount?
Oriel, small, sweet yoga space.
Oh, I've never heard of it.
In Sandymount.
Oriel?
Oriel, yeah.
What does that mean?
AURIEL. I have no idea, actually.
Okay.
We must find out. We must find out.
So Oriel and Yoga Dublin, and then your workshop in January is going to be in Reformation, maybe? Yeah. I've never been there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, they're all great spaces. I mean, that's one of the things of being outside of Dublin for nearly 17 years and coming back is all these incredible spaces and openness to yoga practice and all these things that I wasn't aware of until I came back. So it's another great space in Dublin, yeah.
It's really cool. There's a lot happening in the yoga kind of spirituality space and loads of things. And I think that's because maybe less and less people are drinking now, and we're looking or going to mass, and we're looking for a way to socialise that isn't maybe the pub, even though the pub can be great as well. You
can do both.
You can do both, yeah. Just not beer and yoga at the same time. That's yeah. So Jo, that's it. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
For coming.
Thanks a million, Kevin. Thanks a mil.
Good.